So we're into our second section now, working nationally, and we have a series of speakers, as you can see on the agenda. I'm not going to embarrass them by doing lengthy introductions, but let us just start by hearing from Dr. Warwick Dunn. Thanks, Warwick.
I'd like to thank Sonya and Action for me for the chance to talk today. So I'm a basic researcher. I'm not a medical clinician, but I'm very interested in metabolism, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Both what's already been observed, what's been seen associated with CSF and ME, but how we can take that forward as well, including at Phenome Centre Birmingham. So the next 40 minutes, I'm just going to try and give a general overview, maybe a tour de force, just talking about how important biochemicals in our life, including metabolites, how we can use that to phenotype. So each of us will have a different phenotype, okay? And it's very important we can use metabolites, what we call metabolic phenotype, and to be able to differentiate even between people with supposedly the same disease, but different phenotypes within that disease as well. I'll talk about metabolism. There's been some very interesting research in the last 3 or 4 years. I'll talk about that. And I'll talk about the next trials, and Sonya mentioned this earlier, the MEGA trial, and how we're going to be involved within the metabolomics aspects of that. And I'm happy to take questions at the end or over lunch as well. So biochemicals are very, very important in our everyday lives. Okay? We're eating, we're drinking, they're all composed of different chemicals within there. And really, as a research scientist, I'm involved in the metabolites. So the metabolome is the total complement, every single metabolite within a human body or within a human sample. But obviously, we're all aware of the human genome. We also have a transcriptome and proteome, and each of those, transcriptome, proteome, and metabolome, can be related to specific sample types. It might be different across different tissues within the human body, for example. But they're all very important, they all interact. So if you think about these 100,000 biochemicals within our cells, within our tissues, within our biofluids, such as blood or urine, they're all interacting on a continuous scale. But as you'll see later on, the metabolome, it defines that phenotype most sensitively because it's downstream of most other operations within that system. But for today, let's talk about metabolites. I just want to introduce just a few that are interesting to us. So obviously caffeine. Very, very important. It was a very early start for me today, 5 o'clock start, so caffeine was definitely essential on the train down this morning. So caffeine isn't something we produce ourselves. It's something that we take in from the environment. Okay, so it's something we're taking in exogenously from the environment within there. Glucose is also very important. Obviously, glucose is one of the main energy sources within the body. We take glucose in from a food. We can synthesize glucose within the body. But very much it's like a seesaw. So if you have 2 lower levels of glucose or 2 higher levels of glucose, hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia, then it can lead to various conditions, including insulin resistance and diabetes for hyperglycemia. Okay, so it's about keeping an equilibrium within the system to be able to do that. And carnitine is another important metabolite, not as well known, but carnitines basically shuttle fatty acids out of what we call the mitochondria, which is basically the powerhouses or the power stations of our cells in the human body. And you can actually buy carnitine drinks. I've not seen these in the UK, but I've seen them over in the US. Because they're shuttling fatty acids into the mitochondria and destroying them, basically, it's used as a dietary drink. Okay? But over in Scandinavia, it's used as an energy drink. Okay, because it's producing energy by shuttling fatty acids in and out. So that's just 3 examples of metabolites that are important. We could go on and on for another 2 hours about other metabolites that are important as well. So we talked about metabolites. Well, metabolites interact through what we call the metabolic network. Okay, this is a relatively simplified version of that. There's potentially up to 40,000 metabolites in the human body at any one time. Okay, so relatively simple, but we can look at that and I can think about that and define specific areas, what we call metabolic pathways within there. And I'll talk about some of those metabolic pathways later in the recent research. But if you want to think about this in a different way, anybody who came on the London Underground today, anybody who came on the Central Line that was delayed, you'll know metabolic network operates very similar to the London Underground, to the National Rail system, etc. In that if you want to go from station A to B directly, and there's a stoppage or there's a breakdown of a train on the direct line, what are you going to do? You're going to go and take a diversion and go a different route. Metabolism operates like that as well. So if you hit a specific target, you get this ripple effect going across there. And sometimes that ripple effect is just like throwing a stone in the pond, slow ripple, you can't really see much on there. Sometimes it's quite a significant ripple that you see within there. And then you see different ripples interacting with each other as well. And that's the way that we're trying to think, or the way we're applying what we call metabolomics or metabolic phenotyping in our research, to understand those changes. And in any disease, it's never just one metabolite that's changing on one metabolic pathway. Typically, it's multiple pathways. And that all of those are important. They could be important for different reasons. So as I said earlier on, we're using metabolites to provide this dynamic link to the phenotype. So through these biochemical interactions, not just through metabolites interacting with other metabolites in the metabolic network, but metabolites are involved in regulating other biochemical processes, for example, with proteins or within the transcriptome. But actually, our cells are made up of lipids, which are a type of metabolite as well. All the cells in the human body are made up of different classes of lipids within there. So metabolites have a very important role in a number of different mechanisms within the body, not just metabolism, and we should always remember that when we're thinking about the research and the results that we present. So this is an important slide. So this is talking about the phenotype of the human population, or an individual within the human population. And we go up and down along this continuum between health and disease, okay, on a daily, on a weekly, on a monthly basis. But all those things and many other things around the edge of that slide can all influence us. So, for example, even age. If we take somebody that has of an age of about 20 and take somebody of an age of about 40, there'll be different metabolites at different concentrations in those samples. So, for example, citric acid, which is the sourness you get in lemons, that's as we grow older, we get more citric acid basically measured within our body. Okay. So even things like sleep patterns, pathogens, for example, as well, viruses, bacteria within there, how exercise influences that. So part of my research program is based around using exercise, and even things like gut microflora. So we have one genome in the human body, the human genome, but we also have many other genomes associated with all the different gut microflora, species of gut microflora in the bodies. And the interactions that they have, they can produce metabolites or synthesize metabolites that we can't produce ourselves, and obviously they can have either a positive or negative effect on our bodies, on the phenotype as well. Because it's dynamic, and I'll show how the phenotype is dynamic in a minute, we can use it to measure what we call the longitudinal exposome. So all the different things, the exposome is everything that you've influenced up to today, okay, within your lifetime, and how we can use that to measure that longitudinally over the course of our lifetimes. Here's just two examples of how dynamic our metabolomes can be. Okay, so on your left-hand side, so I don't know my left from my right, this is just one metabolite. Okay, this is a graph of one metabolite over 24 hours. The metabolite is cortisol. It's a steroid hormone, very important, but it has a very cyclic nature, as you can see there. It tends to be highest in the morning, and then it tends to decrease over the day, but after meals, it tends to increase a bit as well. Okay. So that's an example of just one metabolite that's changing over a 24-hour period. We can go even quicker than that as well. So on the right-hand side is one example where this is somebody or a set of people having what we define as a planned heart attack, and it was ethically approved, I will say. But basically, this is people who have heart disease, okay, especially atherosclerosis. They'll have a plaque in the coronary artery. That'll be blocking the flow of blood that's basically feeding nutrients in to support the heart in its function. And what can happen is, within there, an intervention that can happen is to take basically a balloon on a catheter, insert it up through your leg into your coronary artery, blow the balloon up. Now what happens in a heart attack is that plaque will rupture, it will block, there'll be no blood flow into the heart, further along the coronary artery, and this is exactly what's happening there, but the people aren't actually having a heart attack, it's just mimicking the physiology of a heart attack. If we do that and take blood samples before and after that intervention, we can see changes in the blood 1 minute after that intervention. Okay? So that shows how dynamic the metabolome can be within there. And we can understand and actually name the metabolites which are changing over time and how they relate, for example, to mechanisms. So there's 3 examples there related to, for example, inflammatory processes, but also other processes within there. So the metabolome is very dynamic. If we think about a genome, over our lifetime, it's relatively static. There's very minor changes in the genome, okay? But within the metabolome, it's very dynamic. And here's a list of just some of the important biochemical, biological processes that metabolites are involved in. I'm not going to go through these. I just want to really highlight how important metabolites are. I'm not trying to say that metabolites are the only important biochemical here as well. Metabolites, but also proteins, the genome, the transcriptome are important as well. So that's a bit why metabolism, metabolomics, metabolic phenotyping is important. So I just want to talk about some recent research over the last 3 or 4 years. It's been published and really has driven metabolomics or the field of metabolism forward within CSF-ME research. And then talk about how at the Phenome Centre Birmingham we want to support that through the MEGA trial. So some recent studies. So the first published studies that I found came out in 2012 and 2015. So this is from Paul Gooley's group over in Melbourne in Australia. They published this paper. NMR is basically a scientific instrument that we use to measure metabolites. Okay, it's a very expensive instrument, costs about £600,000 to buy, but it's used for what we call these discovery-based studies where we don't know which metabolites are biologically important, so we want to measure as many metabolites as we can. It's what we call a discovery phase or untargeted study within there. So they published this paper, and then they published another paper 3 years later, revealing different metabolic pathways that are important within metabolism associated with CSF-ME. So I'm not going to get into too much detail because I know there's no metabolomics or metabolism experts here, but basically there are changes in the metabolic pathway we call glycolysis. So that's involved in taking blood glucose or taking glucose in, for example, from a diet and using that to produce energy, okay, through a number of different pathways within there. But we saw increased blood glucose levels, which basically meant that the glucose wasn't being used as efficiently as it could be within there. Okay, so a lack of energy, for example, could be associated with that. And instead of using glucose, which is sort of an efficient way to produce energy within the body, amino acids were being used instead, again from the diet, but they're not as efficient. Okay, so we're seeing these changes in types, for example, of the energy sources used within here. And another example of here was looking at increased oxidative stress as well. So that can be quite damaging within the body as well. And with markers, these are 2 very commonly known markers for oxidative stress. And then this year, 2 papers have come out. I'll leave the best till last, or in my mind, the best till last anyway. But here's a paper that came out literally this year, a couple of 3 months ago from Japan. Again, looking at index markers of chronic fatigue syndrome. They're talking about dysfunction within the TCA and the urea cycles. Now, actually, this is really important because glycolysis, use of glucose, feeds into the TCA cycle, okay, to produce energy. So actually, this study is repeating actually the observations which were observed from the Australian studies within there as well. And we had the question earlier on about studies being able to be replicated within there. Even though these are small studies, and I'll come on to size of studies later on, it's really, really important that multiple studies in multiple different groups are showing the same result. It gives you extra confidence in what's happening and being able to take that forward in various different ways. On the right-hand side, so this is a relatively small study, so I would definitely take this with more than a pinch of salt, but it shows the potential of what can be done and what will be done, hopefully in the near future. Here we have 2, what we call the training and validation data sets. So these are 2 independent populations, and this group have looked to define putative biomarker panels, so not a single metabolite, but a group of metabolites. Typically, it's a group of metabolites which will act as a biomarker panel, not a single metabolite. And as you can see, this biomarker panel shows higher levels, just generally levels, in both the training and validation compared to healthy control. So it shows, again, the potential, okay, and we need to validate this in a very robust way with a much larger data set, okay, within there. This is probably the tour de force. Sorry.
May I just ask you to go back one slide, just to capture the Japanese studies by? Thank you.
That's okay. If you come and see me at lunch, I'm happy to send the paper to you. Yep. Yep. This is probably the most important paper. Again, it came out this year over the summer. It's in a journal, PNAS. It's what we call a high impact factor journal. So it's only research of high relevance and of high scientific rigour that are published in these types of journals within here. It comes from Robert Navarro's group over in San Diego in California. So this is a study that's really just defined the metabolic changes associated with CSF and ME. Okay. And I'll go through those in a minute. Again, it was relatively small cohort, what we call a cohort, the selection of subjects studied within here. There's 45 subjects and 45 controls within there. But really it showed that the metabolic effect happens across the metabolic network. There was 20 different metabolic pathways perturbed. They measured about, I think it was about 500 metabolites, and about 80% of those were all decreased in CSF-ME compared to the healthy controls. Okay. So it's what we would define, and what Robert's defined as a hypermetabolic state. Okay. And actually what was important with this is that even though there are different phenotypes within CSF-ME, actually the homogeneity of the phenotype that we're measuring in the metabolome is very, very similar across all of those. So that's an absolutely key point within there. And actually the group have gone on to define that, that CSF-ME are chemically similar in response to environmental stress known as DAWA. Okay, so it's a really, really important aspect and really, really important piece of research which needs to be followed up, but actually is going to be able to drive forward further research. We know specific targets to look at now and investigate in more detail within there. It's been so important, there's been a number of blogs, etc. on there that are available, including this one, which was written by Ronald Davis over in the US. So all those are available. I'm happy to share those or send information or tweet on those. But these are the early steps. So we're only 3 or 4 years in. There's only been a few number of published studies within there, so further work is needed. It's really, really important to be able to do that. And we want to be able to do that within the UK to support the UK population. So there's been some studies, and there's some studies being developed, both over in Australia and over in the US. And there's just 2 examples there of studies that I'm aware of. There may be others as well within there. And again, you can go and have a look at those on the websites shown there. And then in the UK, as Sonya mentioned earlier, the MEGA trial is now being developed. So this will look at recruiting up to 12,000 subjects, monitoring those longitudinally, including biochemicals, including the metabolites that we've discussed today, so that we can look at those. So it's a really large-scale study, and when you're looking at these types of diseases, such as ME, CSF, or disabilities, it's very, very important to have large sample numbers to be able to ensure that what you're measuring is valid and is robust, and it's not just that you've selected 40 people out of a population of 250,000, and all of those phenotypically are quite close to each other, but there's a whole load of other people over here which aren't related phenotypically or closely phenotypically to this group here. So it's a randomization. The larger the size you sample within there, the more robustness and statistical validity you'll have within there. So keep an eye out on this. The MEGA website will be available, I understand, relatively soon. Okay, so I've been told this morning, so do keep an eye out for that, and I do highly recommend being involved with that study as well. It'll be a really, really important study. It's not just focusing on metabolome, it's just focusing on collecting big data, what we call big data, so phenotypic information, molecular information, other information as well within there. So at Phenome Centre Birmingham, we're very, very happy to support this. So Phenome Centre Birmingham is a research centre, obviously up in Birmingham, at the University of Birmingham, where we're using scientific instruments called mass spectrometers. And basically we're measuring the mass of each of those metabolites that we measure, and we can measure hundreds or thousands of metabolites in a single sample, blood or urine sample. And we can also measure the quantity or the concentration of those metabolites with using mass spectrometry for that. So we're able to analyse tens of thousands of samples a year, so we can do these large-scale studies, and there's only a few groups actually globally that have the capacity to be able to do this and do this well. And as I said, we have 2 different strategies that we apply. It's either the hypothesis-generating studies, the discovery studies looking at metabolism as a whole, or hypothesis testing strategies. So they would be more, we found a specific biomarker panel and we want to validate that in an independent population to take that, for example, into healthcare. And really our goals within the mega trial are to support translational research. And actually, if you go to the bottom of that slide, the 4 areas that we're interested in and hoping to improve on is the diagnosis, but also being able to identify molecular targets for treatment. It probably won't be one single molecular target. It will probably be multiple targets. To identify biomarkers to prognostically define later outcomes. So being able to intervene earlier, and if you intervene earlier, the intervention tends to be less severe. Okay. So for example, in diabetes, if you go to the doctor, they say you're overweight, a bit like me, and they say you're not exercising enough, they will intervene with dietary and exercise interventions with there, which might be less severe than, for example, pharmacological or even going to surgery later in life. So they're really, really important within there. But to identify biomarkers which might define whether you respond or not to specific treatment. So we want, everybody in this room isn't the same, we want to be able to what we call stratify, so to be able to say that these sub-cohort, subset people will respond to this treatment, another subset will respond to a different treatment, for example. We'll be able to do that so you get in the right treatment first time, every time. We're a relatively new centre. We opened literally this year, okay, in May this year, and we had an open day, and you can see Sir Mark Walport on the top left-hand side. He's the Chief Scientific Officer for the government. He came and opened the Phenome Centre. And actually, within that, Mark Vant, who's on the right of that top picture, who's the Executive Director of the Phenome Centre, announced that we're going to be supporting CSF and ME research within the future, including through the mega trial within there. And Sonya was kind enough to provide a statement for that as well. So it's getting the field out, it's getting the knowledge out, getting the communication out within there. And collaboration is going to be absolutely key in here. We won't just be doing metabolomics, all the molecular aspects that we'll be providing, for example, the genomics, etc., but all the other types of data within that big data set. And integrating that and analysing that together is going to be absolutely key. And no one person, no one group can do that. It's very, very key on a number of different groups and key collaborations within there. Just as a quick example of how new technologies, so we're performing research in clinical medicine, but we're also performing research in new tools to be able to perform research or be able to help with, for example, monitoring of diseases. And one of those is using dry blood spots. So typically, if you need to provide a blood sample, you'd need to go into a doctor's surgery or into the hospital, or somebody will need to come and visit you at home, somebody trained to be able to take those blood samples. Okay. If you want to monitor somebody over a long period of time, being able to do that is both costly, but also obviously very cumbersome for yourselves within there. So one way we're looking at being able to do this is already done. So most of you would have had a heel prick when you were born, okay, basically dry blood spot, and that would have been analysed for inborn errors of metabolism. So we want to take that forward. They're only looking at about 30 or 40 metabolites in that. We want to be able to expand it out to look at thousands of metabolites in any one sample. And the good thing about this is you can collect these yourself. You just place them onto a card that you can see in the top of the slide there. You can put them in the post via Royal Mail and send them back to wherever they need to go. Okay, so it's a relatively easy way without all the concerns of needing to go or have blood collected within there. And this is something we're looking at the moment. And the figure on the bottom, or the figure on the bottom there is basically, it looks very informative. It is very informative. Each of those different lines in there basically is a different metabolite. Okay, so we can see a lot of different information within these. Okay. So just to summarise, hopefully I've shown you today that some early and very key research has been performed. It's shown the importance of metabolism in CSF and ME. These studies are the first step to success. They're not the finish. We need to take these further and develop new informative trials and studies to be able to do this, including the mega trial here in the UK. And the reason, well, one of the reasons for the mega trial and why we're really interested in this as well is the large scale. We're not looking at 40 versus 40 people. We're going to be able to look at hundreds, thousands of people, but also being able to look at those longitudinally as well, and having the capacity and capability to be able to do that within the Phenome Centre. And within the Phenome Centre at Birmingham, we're delighted to play this important role within the mega and future studies within there. And finally, thank you for listening.
So, are there any questions Well, we have. I thought there would be. I thought there would be.
I'll be around for lunch, so if you want to come see me then, if you're running over.
Hello, that was very interesting. How do you get involved in this trial, and what's your recruitment process?
So I'm not recruiting, so I'm not going to say that. I'm going to pass that to Sonya.
If our AV guy can pop on the microphone, thank you. So we haven't developed the protocol. We haven't decided what it's going to look like. The reason we haven't done that yet is because we're recruiting an advisory group of people with ME, people with an interest with ME, and carers to actually work with the scientists and people like myself to help design that study. That then needs to happen, and we will apply for funding next year. We the way in which the funding works, we don't necessarily know when application rounds are coming out. We've just heard that one's come out. It only came out in the last week or two, and the timescale is very tight. So the focus will be when we launch the website, hopefully within the next week or so, that we'll also launch the recruitment for the advisory group. And we're looking for 12 to 15 people to work as part of the team to help design the study. Once we've done that, we need to get the funding. Once we've got the funding, then we need to start recruiting. So hopefully there'll be some news on that over the forthcoming year or so. But there are a number of steps that we've got to go through first.
So maybe in the next couple of years, and you're looking to recruit 12,000 people?
If we were successful, and I mean, you know, it's really tough to get research funding for this level of work from the mainstream funders, and we're not just talking a few sort of tens or hundreds of thousands like Action for ME finance, we're talking millions here, and there are going to be several phases. The first phase is actually to collect the samples. So if we were successful in the outline bid, which goes in January, we'd then be invited to submit a full application within the next couple of months. There'd be a decision-making period, and I would hope that if we were successful, we would hear, and this time next year, we'd be at the point of recruiting. But I say that not being somebody that's heavily involved in the actual application timescale. So I'm just, you know, please don't quote me necessarily on that.
No, it's just interesting to know. And the dried blood spot thing sounds brilliant if you can make that work.
Hi, thanks very much for coming down here, Rick, today. Have you been in touch with Robert Navu and Ron Davis, the people who put out the big paper in the summer? And also, have you talked to Carl Morton, who's the ME Association are looking to fund a £50,000 project headed by Julia Newton, who's the medical advisor for Action for ME, and also Carl Morton down in Oxford. So are you in touch with these people?
No, I'm not, but I'd like to be. So the two authors, hopefully I'm going to meet them next year over in the US when I'm over there. I've not heard the other two, so I might come find you at lunch as well. Great.
Sonia, do you want to
yeah, I can add to that. So certainly we've been in touch with both researchers and the Open Medicine Foundation, where Ron Davis is doing the work. So he's taken 20 severely ill patients, and they've taken lots of data. So it's big data on a small number of people, but very, very in-depth. And over the next, I spoke to their chief exec when I was at the conference in the States a couple of weeks ago. They're looking at allowing researchers to apply to use the data, and that should be on a platform in the next few weeks. And certainly Rick and I emailed Rick as soon as I got back from the States and said, I think we should think about using this data. Could it be helpful? They're very keen to collaborate, certainly speaking to Linda, who set up the Open Medicine Foundation. They want people to use their data. They're very open to discussion and working with other organisations, and it's certainly something that the mega team will be considering as we move forward. In terms of Carl Morton, I met him a couple of weeks ago at the Research Collaborative conference, and doing some very interesting work. Again, it's at small level, but we are funding work on mitochondria, which Julia Newton is involved in through Joe Elson at Newcastle University. So we're working really hard to connect the dots, but still a lot more work to be done there.
Okay. Did I see someone over this side? No. Oh. Okay. Yeah, okay. My peripheral vision didn't let me down then, but a question down the front here.
Right, yeah, I almost forgot my question there. Okay, so some people who are going to criticise this, and it's certainly not me, but they're going to say, well, of course you're going to find metabolic anomalies in these patients. They're sitting around thinking that they're ill, they're not moving around very much, and all you're doing is detecting the fact that they are not very active. Is there anything in what you're finding or what you're looking at so far, and I think this is true of other studies, that is indicating that the anomalies you're finding there are quite specific to chronic fatigue syndrome? I mean, you just mentioned mitochondrial dysfunctions, for example. You mentioned amino acid signatures, which are unusual and so on, maybe feeding back from mitochondria which are struggling, that sort of thing. Yeah. Is it specific, or do you need to actually go out and use as some of your controls people who actually are deconditioned, people who perhaps are amputees, who don't move around so much, or haemophiliacs who don't go out and play football, that sort of thing, in order to make sure that you're not just measuring deconditioning?
That's a perfect question, yes. So in a lot of these studies that have been performed, it's the two extremes really that you're looking at within there, and you want to be able to fill the gaps, and it's very easy to find differences as well as two extremes, okay? But being able to design that study to make sure that you are including those other conditions, for example, that could be related or will have similar physiological effects, is absolutely key within there. Certainly some of the work that's been done in the US, they're not just looking at, for example, ME/CSF or DAWA, they're looking at a range of different diseases, and they're showing that even within each of those different diseases, there are differences associated with that. So that's a very good question.
Okay, we'll take one last question. Yep.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kevin.
Hi.
I'm interested in whether you need to look at lifestyle and environmental factors as well as measuring the blood, because if that's a part of the change and the alteration needed, surely you need to be measuring that as well with a questionnaire or whatever.
We do. So in any study that we do, we normally control for things like age, gender, BMI and lifestyle within there, so that we don't have all in one group people over the age of 60 and the other group less than 20. So that is always part of the study and be able to do this. So yeah, but another very good question, yeah.
Okay, that's great, Warwick. I knew you'd get plenty of questions. Yeah. Thanks very much. Thank you. He may regret it, but he did put the offer out there that he was available to people at lunchtime. So, so Katie, over to you.
Thanks. Hello everyone. I'm going to be talking to you for a little while about some of the work that Action for ME has been doing as part of the all-party parliamentary group, the APPG, on ME. Now, the all-party parliamentary group is one of many. They're informal groups run by and for parliamentarians from the Houses of Commons and Lords. And it's just an opportunity for them to explore issues relating to that particular subject matter. The reason we're involved in it is it's a great route to access these people who have a number of constraints on their time, causes vying for their attention. So this just provides an opportunity for us to try and arrange those meetings, set up that engagement through those formal channels, and in doing so, highlight the issues that affect people with ME. It additionally provides the advantage of having a number of other ME organisations being involved in the running and the work of this group. These are the 10 of them involved, with Action for ME and the ME Association additionally doing some of the providing secretariat services, doing some administrative things for the group. One of the things in working in the APPG is that each of these groups has a very distinct programme of work, and with that they bring their own point of view. Some of the organisations there focus on research, others focus on specific groups such as those who are severely affected, some of them focus on young people with ME. So necessarily with that, there's not always an identical approach from each of these organisations, and I think one of the great opportunities the parliamentary group provides is providing a forum for us to discuss and find key issues where we can come together, collaborate and work together. And I think when it comes to influencing, that's really vital because policymakers have so many constraints on their time, as I mentioned, and so by focusing on areas of consensus, we can really have a strong, unified voice and focus on having a clear and focused message to really get those points across in the limited opportunities that we have. To mention some of the work that the APPG is currently doing and exploring doing in the future. The current programme of work is mostly focused around a social care inquiry that's been going on over the course of this year. I think one of the things that I would most like to highlight in that is the fact that it really gives us an opportunity to bring the experiences of people with ME front and centre. Some of the evidence we've collected is a roundtable that was attended by ME organisations, health and care professionals, and also the parliamentarians who were there to hear that evidence. A survey has also taken place where over 850 people with ME shared their experiences of social care, how they thought it could be improved, and that's really what the work is based on. Another area that's currently being explored is collaborating with other APPGs. I think I've stressed enough already that parliamentarians have a lot of causes vying for their time, so this is another way of collaborating with other groups. For example, parliamentary groups that represent other people with neurological conditions, fluctuating conditions, disability, really any area where there is a opportunity to find a joint programme of work, and in doing so really create a mass of people that will really get greater attention. And I've also included diagnosis as a possibility to be explored in the future. This was something that was suggested at the last APPG meeting, and I think it just provides a really good example of where there's a strong consensus among charity partners that it's an area to explore. Now, the problems with diagnosis are, and the reason it creates such a strong consensus is that it can be the root to so many other problems. Misdiagnosis can lead to ineffective or detrimental treatment, and sometimes an official diagnosis is required for people with ME to access the specialist health and care services that they need. So I think that just provides an example of the kind of topics we want to focus on to get that strong consensus, strong action in the future. So broadly speaking, you've seen about the strategy earlier today, and it's distributed on the tables in front of you. The work of the APPG fits squarely in the blue third, that is influencing action, to try and get more, not influencing action, sorry, getting more influence and more action and better understanding of issues surrounding ME. The ways it does this is in providing that direct route to policymakers in those formal channels that allow us to arrange meetings with them, undertake joint programs of work with them, and really move that forward. And again, the fact that it's a forum for collaboration between all the charity partners. And I'll emphasize the final point, that it is the means of amplifying the voice of people with ME and ensuring that policymakers hear directly from them. I think that's something that all the charities involved in the parliamentary group are really keen to emphasise. They all bring their own experiences, they all share the stories of people with ME that they've come in contact with, and ultimately the value of our collaboration is only as important as how much it improves the lives of people with ME. So I think that's something that is really key to focus on in our work in this area. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Katie. That's great. Kat, do you want to move this important initiative in Scotland?
Hello. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our new Mentor ME Peer Support Network project, which is a 5-year project. And it fits within the improving the lives of people with ME theme of the new strategy. And focus will be on improving support and reducing isolation for people with ME and carers. Okay, so the idea for this project stemmed from discussion groups that we held last year in a different one-year project around a self-management theme called Living and Learning with ME. And we had groups of people in and around Edinburgh and Fife who came down and talked about their experiences of self-management and the sorts of tips and experiences that they wanted to share with other people with the condition. And during the course of those discussions, somebody called Kelly, who I'm going to introduce you to in a short film clip later on, he came up with this idea of having mentors. He felt very strongly that everybody with ME could actually benefit from mentoring at some level. And it was something we thought was a good idea. Other people within the groups were quite enthusiastic about it, so it corresponded with an opportunity to apply for funding from the Health and Social Care Alliance Scotland, which manages a Scottish Government grant called Transforming Self-Management in Scotland. And unusually, we had the opportunity to apply for up to 5 years funding, which is very, very unusual. And in terms of the grants that we've had previously, they've been very short funding, and we felt that that was an opportunity to go for a longer-term project where we could set up a network and get it up and running properly. So we've got 2 volunteers. Kelly, who had the original idea, is involved very strongly, and also Joan Kerr, who's been working with us on a long-term basis, and she's helping out with both the writing of the proposal, but also providing advice as we go along and just a sounding board for the development of the network as it takes place. So one of the things I wanted to highlight about this grant, and we've had a lot of good experience of working with the Alliance as a funder, but they were very keen to support this particular project because of the direct involvement of people with ME in the proposal writing and the idea behind it. So our overriding aim is to support people with ME and carers to manage the condition while living their lives as fully as possible. And fairly obviously, we're looking at benefits to mentees, so the people who are receiving mentoring support, in terms of reducing isolation, but also in terms of supporting them to achieve the things that they think are important, and that may possibly be identifying the things that they feel are important that they can change within the limits of their condition, and working towards those with the support of a mentor. But we also think it's important that mentors themselves are able to benefit from their involvement in this project. So there's a strong element of skills development built into the project and the network as it develops. One of the things that's really important and a little bit different about this particular project is that we're aiming to establish a sustainable network of peer mentors across Scotland. So it's something we're not looking just to set up a service, which is complicated and difficult enough as it is, but we're also looking to set up a network that we will be able to support people with ME who are involved as volunteer peer mentors in taking forward. So by the end of the 5-year project, the aim is to be able to hand that over to a network of peer mentors, and we're looking at having at least a core group of 4 volunteer peer mentors who are very committed to the network and are able to take that forward in whatever shape that may take. So we're hoping that there will be wider project learning, and we'll be able to inform strategic planning of the organisation, but also feed into policy work as well as we go forward. So what is peer mentoring? I'll say very quickly just a little bit about it, because there are different ideas about what peer mentoring actually is. We're talking about one-to-one, very person-centred, holistic support. So it's a little bit like coaching in that we're quite goal-centred, and we're keeping it quite structured in a way. We're keen that it doesn't sort of merge into a kind of a friendship stroke befriending scheme. We're looking to have it focused upon things that people can achieve. Our mentors and mentees can very happily become friends afterwards. That's not an issue. But we'd like to keep it focused around a time-limited time frame with lots of support. And monitoring and supervision that's going on, so that mentors feel supported in what they're doing, and also checking in with the mentees themselves to make sure they're getting the most out of the process. So mentors obviously have very specific personal qualities that we're looking for, but we're also going to be providing quite a lot of in-depth training across some 5 sessions so that people will get a chance to actually practice being a mentor and to look at some of the pitfalls and think about some of the issues around safeguarding and looking after their mentees as well as they go forward. So developing the network, we're starting out in Lothians and Fife area, Edinburgh, Lothians and Fife, with a view to rolling out gradually in 3 phases across Scotland. We're starting in that area primarily because the project that they stem from involved people who were also involved in becoming mentors, and it seemed sensible to start in that area where they were based. So we're aiming to be starting the training of the first batch of mentors very soon now. With a view to starting to enroll mentees and starting the mentoring process itself in the spring of next year. So some of the support that we'll be providing will be around setting up local support groups, but not in terms of ME support groups, but just mentoring support groups, so little informal groups of people in local areas who can support each other as mentors and share experience. And linked into that, we'll also be looking at providing top-up skills development sessions on topics that mentors are finding that they think they would benefit from having a little bit more support in. And aiming towards having a sustainability review in 2020. And that's where we'll be working with mentors to work out, well, actually, how can we best take this network forward with a view to handing over to this core group of 5 mentors. Okay, so I'm going to now introduce Kelly McClellan, who is the person who had the original idea for this particular project and for providing peer mentoring. And he's done a little video. He wasn't able to come down to London today, but I wanted him to have a voice in this process, and I've asked him to tell us just a little bit about his inspiration and the reason why he felt it was important to offer mentoring to people with ME, and also what he hopes the network will provide in the future. So could we have the film, please?
Back in 2001, I took part in an illness management course run by the NHS Lothian at the Western General Hospital here in Edinburgh. I didn't get much out of the course, but I did get a lot out of interacting with other people with ME. In fact, after one of the sessions, I said to a friend that my problem was that I knew and understood where we were supposed to be going, what the course was telling us to aim for. But I was actually addicted to my previous life, my life without ME, and I was having a hard time making the transition from where I wanted to be to where I needed to be. And that probably what I needed was something like a sponsor, like from Alcoholics Anonymous, or a guide or a mentor. And that what I was getting most out of the course was talking to other people in the course who were going through the same process, perhaps not having any more experience in adapting than I had, but they had a different experience, and we were able to bounce ideas off of each other and help each other make that transition. So after the course, because I got so much benefit out of interacting with other people with ME, I became more involved in the Edinburgh ME self-help group. I even became convener for a few years, and one of the things that I said to absolutely everybody I met was that I felt that we needed to have mentors, that I felt that everybody should have a mentor who had ME. Even mentors would need to have a mentor. I wanted everybody to be able to have somebody they could talk to. Of course, when you're talking to other people with ME, it can be quite a daunting task, because a lot of people don't feel that they can offer that to somebody else because they don't have the energy. They have enough energy to live their life or just get by at the moment, and if they have spare energy, they want to give it to their families. So it was always a hard sell, but when I took part in Action for ME's Living and Learning with ME project last year, I gave my same spiel that I always give about how I think people with ME need to have a mentor. And Kat Allen from Action for ME liked the idea. She liked it so much she actually ran with the idea, and it's happening. I can't believe it. It just goes to show that when you have a good idea, sometimes all you need to do is tell the right person. So I'm really excited about this mentoring program that Action for ME have set up here in Scotland, and I'm excited to be involved in it. And I really do think that it's going to help a lot of people with ME.
That was a good finish, Kat. Well done. Third party endorsement right at the end. Split. You can certainly. It did say we would try to save them for the end, but go on.
Hello, my name is Penelope Bold. I'm a psychotherapist from Warwick, and I've lived with ME for over 20 years, which is how I became an electric wheelchair user. Thanks, it's good to hear about the project and how things have come together. Could I just ask you, one thing I get quite concerned about is language. I mean, the overall project, of course, is the most important thing, but in addition to carers, where quite often the term carer might imply somebody who makes decisions for you, not always, but it might imply that, then a lot of us may have the luxury of having got funding to have personal assistance, which is a term I'd prefer to use, you know, so it's more empowering. And I just wondered if you use the social model of disability in how you're framing the mentoring, so that people are thinking themselves as disabled people in a pan-disability way, and our impairments happen to be those of ME, rather than just that we're people who are ill. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yes, I do. I'm not sure. Can you hear me? That's a really complicated question to answer. I mean, yes, I agree with you absolutely about the social model, and I guess I'm using carers in quite a sloppy and shorthand way. A lot of the people I would describe as carers actually wouldn't see themselves as carers anyway in that respect. And we were just trying to open up to people who have experience of ME either directly or through looking after somebody else at some level with the condition. But I mean, I have no problem with the language that you're using at all. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, thanks very much. Just because I think it's empowering for people. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Good luck with it.
Thank you. So we're now joined by Bernard Elwen, who's the Honorary Secretary of the MS National Therapy Centre, who's going to talk to us. Thank you.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your invitation. I'm here on behalf of Multiple Sclerosis National Therapy Centres, and I'm here to talk to you about the therapy centres who are members of our organisation and what they provide for those who are affected by MS and, in some cases, other neurological conditions such as ME. So, MS National Therapy Centres, or MSNTC for short, is an umbrella body, and it represents the interests of the member centres. We currently have 48 centres who are members of our organisation, with several others who, for one reason or other, aren't members, but we're actively working on them. And our remit is to promote and support our member centres so that they can deliver their services to their customers more effectively. So each centre is a standalone independent charity with its own board of trustees and its own governance structure. So we're not a head office in that way. We are basically a facilitating body, and we are a charity in our own right, and we exist to support 48 other charities. So what does an MS centre look like? So as I said, we've got 48 member centres in the UK, and we've got over 50 in the UK as a total. And here's a picture of the largest one. So this is the Chilterns MS Therapy Centre, which is in Wendover in Buckinghamshire. Now the Chilterns Centre delivers its services to over 300 people each week, and not necessarily the same 300 people each week. So they've got over 600 members in total throughout Buckinghamshire and bits of Hertfordshire, and there's an increasing demand for their services. Now, MS therapy centres are not supported by the public purse. So in the main, they're funded by donations and charges for their services from centre users, and also fundraising initiatives, and from applying for grants and trusts. So, for example, the Chiltern Centre, which you see here, has recently raised £21,000 with a fundraising initiative called Walk the MS Mile, whereby people with MS collected sponsorship for themselves to walk a mile in one of the 5 towns within the centre's catchment area. And other centres, for example, have sponsored skydives. There's all the cake breaks, the tin shakes, and my own centre, which I'm chair of the trustees of in Norwich, has had something called the Quid Stick, where you put your pound coins in this Perspex quid stick, which measures a yard. And then the idea was that we would have a mile of quid stick stretching from our centre to Norwich Airport. But we didn't quite get to Norwich Airport, but we raised over £12,000 that year when we did the initiative. So that's just 2 examples of what centres do. And the other main fundraising is to be applying for funds from grants and trusts and other grant-making bodies. And we use the trust funding website a lot to do that. Now, the majority of centres have a salaried centre manager with a few other paid staff, generally part-time. So, for example, the senior oxygen operator may very well be a paid member of staff who works part-time. But the majority of staff, in inverted commas, are actually unpaid volunteers. They've either got MS themselves, or they have a family member with multiple sclerosis, or, like me, they may have retired early and become involved in the MS Therapy Centre world. So we've got quite a mixture of people who are involved in running our centres. Now, I've just shown you a picture of one of our biggest centres in the Chilterns in Wendover. Now, here's a very much smaller one. Here is the one in Wick, which is up in Scotland. And yes, I know it does look rather like an ice cream kiosk on the seafront, but in actual fact, it houses a small oxygen chamber. And it's only open on demand and has just a handful of users and an even smaller handful of volunteers, and it's staffed entirely by volunteers. So that's the 2 extremes of the centres that we have within our membership. And we've got a number of centres like this, and the majority of them started up 25 to 30 years ago to provide oxygen therapy for people with MS. And these centres have just carried on in their own small way with the sessions 2 or 3 times a week and a regular client base. They've obviously got smaller overheads, but they don't offer the range of services which our larger centres do. Now, oxygen therapy. This is what a typical oxygen chamber looks like, and this is the one in Swindon, which I understand 1 or 2 of you here have been to visit. Now, this is quite a new chamber. It seats 12 people, and it does look rather like an oil storage tank from the outside. Now, chambers can vary from an individual mono chamber, which some of our centres have, and these just seat the 1 person, but most of our chambers seat from 6 to 8 people. Now, this one, as I say, is quite new. It's like a torpedo shape. But the majority of them are circular bell-shaped chambers, and they seat 6 to 8 people round the outside in a circle. Now, the chamber is pressurized, meaning that air is forced in by a compressor until the pressure inside the chamber is 2 atmospheres. So if you think of the atmosphere of the air around us in this room being 1 atmosphere, the chamber is double the pressure in this room. So our chambers are actually correctly called barrow chambers as opposed to a hyperbaric chamber. Now these chambers are used by deep sea divers who've got nitrogen narcosis or the bends, and they're also used for intensive healing, and they are pressurized to substantially greater pressure than ours are. And that's why that our chambers have been deregulated under Care Quality Commission regulations, because they don't go down to the depths that hyperbaric chambers do. Now the chamber's operated by a trained senior operator who can either be a paid member of staff, as I've said earlier, or a volunteer. And that senior operator, or number one operator as we call him or her, should be assisted by a number two operator. And the training is provided by Multiple Sclerosis National Therapy Centres by what we call our cascade system. So our training head of training, if you like, is the head of the Manx Hyperbaric Unit on the Isle of Man, and he, assisted by our Honorary Medical Advisor, deliver the training to regional training advisors who, again, are volunteers who are paid for their, just paid for their mileage. And they go around and deliver training to the oxygen operators, and they also do the annual inspections to make sure that the operators know what they're doing and that they're doing things according to the manuals that we produce and update, and also that their procedures are as they've been trained to do. So we have our training, and we also monitor the standards of operation of our oxygen chambers. So that's why, because we are very good at monitoring ourselves, that's why we've been deregulated. So let's go on to, right, this is what it looks like inside, and here are some of our happy customers. Now they're sitting inside the chamber, breathing in pure oxygen, and these are from the Manchester Centre. And when we breathe normally, as we're doing now, we take in 21% oxygen, and the rest is nitrogen and other gases such as helium and carbon dioxide and all the other inert gases. But oxygen is a great natural healing agent, and it's by breathing it in under pressure, it gets into the bloodstream much quicker. And what it's been proved is that swelling around the nerve tissues reduces, and it also helps to reduce the formation of scar tissue, which is the root cause of multiple sclerosis. And it's not a cure for MS, we know that, and there's no cure for MS. But what oxygen therapy does is to offer relief from some of the symptoms, such as fatigue and constipation, to name but two. So each session lasts an hour with an additional 10 minutes either side to allow for the chamber to pressurize and depressurize. And the majority of people who try oxygen therapy report that they're better able to get through the day without getting so tired. And most users have a session once a week. So they start off by doing 5 sessions at a lower pressure, and then the pressure is increased to 2 atmospheres, which is our normal chamber operating pressure. And then the vast majority of them find that once the benefits start to kick in after 4 or 5 sessions, they carry on with it. But we admit that oxygen doesn't work for everybody, which is fine. But it works for most people, or most people who've come to our MS therapy centres. So they carry on, and then they book themselves onto sessions once a week. And most of our centres are actually quite full. And the biggest challenge is finding enough volunteers to staff the centres, or staff the chambers. How do you get to an MS therapy centre, and how do you get to oxygen? Well, we don't require a GP to refer you, and most of people who come along to our centres are self-referred, or they've come via friends, or they've been recommended by an MS nurse. But we do expect users to notify their GP out of courtesy. And I've got some leaflets which I'll happily hand out at lunchtime. Right, okay. Other therapies now. most centres offer a range of other therapies led by qualified therapists. So here you see customers at the Sutton and Croydon MS Centre, which incidentally is one of our only 2 centres that doesn't offer oxygen therapy, although they are actively pursuing it by they've put in plans to the local council for expansion. So this time next year they may be offering oxygen therapy, but not at the moment. So these people are enjoying a physiotherapy session, and physio is very popular in most of our centres, with physiotherapists either being employed part-time or self-employed. And our physiotherapists are all very knowledgeable about MS, and they have got a good understanding of what exercises are beneficial to those who have it. Now, centres vary according to size and what they offer, as I've mentioned earlier, but other examples of some of the therapies that we offer in our centres include Pilates, yoga, reflexology, acupuncture, Reiki, massage, and osteopathy. And several also offer welfare and benefits counselling, so they're sort of like a one-stop shop for anybody who's got multiple sclerosis and increasingly other neurological conditions. Now, they don't all have this, but this is the hydrotherapy pool at the Chiltern Centre. Chiltern Centre is one of our newest centres, as well as being one of our largest. It opened 6 years ago on some land which was given to the centre in exchange for a housing development which is now on their old centre. So there was a bit of a land swap. So they did quite well out of it. So when you eventually find it at the top of a housing estate, this is what you find. So this is it's a hydrotherapy pool. It's especially valuable to someone with weakened muscles, as water takes the weight and also helps with balance. And the warm water as well also acts as a muscle relaxant. So it's very popular. So, right, to finding an NS therapy centre near you. So in your pack, which you should have had as you came in, you'll find a list of those MS therapy centres whose services are available for those with ME and other neurological conditions. And please note that this is by no means every one of our centres. I mentioned that we've got 48 centres, but as you can appreciate, the centres were all set up to cater for those with multiple sclerosis, and this is where their priorities lie. So making facilities available for those with other conditions, such as ME, Parkinson's, cancer, is very much according to the capacity available at the individual centre. So I mentioned earlier about the capacities of the chamber, and the other constraint on capacity is the availability of suitable volunteers who can operate those chambers. So I don't have any time for any. Have we got time for questions? Probably not.
We're
right,
a bit pushed for time, actually, Bernard. Thank you.
Okay, fine. I will be around at lunchtime, so if anybody wants to come and talk to me, I'll say I've got some leaflets about oxygen therapy and MS National Therapy Centres, so if you want to find out more, just come and approach me over lunch. Thank you very much.
Great. So, thank you, Bernard. Really good. We're pushed for time, but I'd done a deal with Sonya right at the beginning that said if we get behind during the morning, this is the last session that I would squeeze, but it's quite an important session, and something as an organisation which we've increasingly started to do is to perhaps box above our weight in terms of influence and significance, and this is an initiative, I think, which falls dead centre in that aspiration. So why don't you explain what it's about? It sounds rather grand. Our global movement.
I'm just going to start by offering an observation from the trip that I had to the MS Therapy Centre in Swindon. What really struck me was that they were very keen and already are delivering services to people with ME. And whilst there may not be an evidence base around the use of oxygen treatment, they reported that some people with ME found it very helpful. So I would certainly encourage you to find out more. It may not be right for you, and we know that what works for one doesn't work for another. The other thing that really struck me was that they offer peer support for people with neurological conditions, so not just people with MS, but there were a number of people with ME that were accessing that groups. And there's something to be said about collaboration across illness groups. And so where there aren't support groups in your local area, or that actually it's not right for you, it may be worth thinking about what exists for other neurological conditions and whether that might be something you want to access. So as Alan said, I've been asked to talk about our global movement. It sounds very grand, and don't have a global movement, but we're making a little bit of a dent in it. And so we heard earlier on that around 17 to 20 million people worldwide with ME. I think that's a really shocking statistic. And what we do know is that we can achieve an awful lot more, as I said earlier, when we work together. What we've heard this morning is what can change right from a local level, with Kelly talking about what he thinks would work. We've now got a 5-year project. We've got local groups that are working with us, and we're now starting to achieve more. We're working with different illness groups. But actually, what could be achieved if we worked at a global level? I was quite surprised when I was in the States a few weeks ago that there are no, and I haven't checked these facts, but there are no direct patient support groups in the United States, which I was told made us the largest in the world, which is ridiculous. 750,000, 800,000, whatever, pounds a year, and we're the largest in the world, and there are 20 million people with this illness. So we have a duty and an obligation to work with people in other countries to try and tackle the level of need that there is, to raise the profile of the illness, and to make those in positions of power stand up and listen and actually do something and take action. So this is I feel like I'm name dropping. I was in the States and I was in Geneva. Normally I'm just in really rubbish hotels where we don't have hot water in London like I had the night before last. But I did have the opportunity for the last 2 years, to go to Geneva to the World Health Assembly Summit. Now, it sounds really great. It's actually quite dull. It's lots of people sitting around using lots of technical language that I didn't understand. But this is the powerhouse in terms of decision-making for the health across the world. It's where big decisions are made that affect each and every one of us in this room. And when a decision is made, a resolution is passed, governments have to go back to their countries, and they have to do something different. So what would be amazing if we actually got those people in that big powerhouse to understand what ME is, how it impacts on 20 million people around the world, and the 3, 4, 10 family members plus that live with this illness on a day-to-day basis. What could happen if we got them to stand up, listen, take note, and actually make a decision that forced the UK government, and I probably shouldn't say forced, but encouraged the UK government, gave them a mandate to come back and take action, to put more money into biomedical research, to put more money into social care services to support people on a day-to-day basis, to put money into healthcare services that not only recognise the illness, but actually could diagnose the illness and then provide something in terms of treatment, rather than just helping people live with the illness on a day-to-day basis. But we can't do that as a teeny tiny little organisation sitting here in the UK. We have to work with others. So about 18 months ago, we set up an international alliance, and we're working with people in the States, Australia. We've been in contact with people in Japan who are looking to set up an organisation, been in contact with people in Canada and various other places to say, informally, let's just chat. Let's talk about the issues we deal with. We may have completely opposing views, but we can agree that something needs to change. We don't know how, we don't know what that might look like, but we could talk together and find a way to do that. And whilst we do that, why don't we just provide each other with a little bit of support? Because it's actually quite a difficult area to work in. So we've set up that alliance at the moment. We're just exploring what that means. But what I'd like to do now is introduce Solve CFS ME initiative in the States. And I met with the chief exec and their vice president, who you're going to hear talk in a moment, came across to the Research Collaborative Conference a couple of months ago. So if we can play the film, they're going to tell you a little bit about what they do and why collaboration is important to them. If we could play the film, please.
Hello, friends. I'm Carol Head. I'm the president of the Solve ME-CFS initiative, and I'm delighted to be here today with Dr. Zahir Nali, our vice president for research.
Hello everybody. Hello Carol, thank you. We are really excited to share some of our research and advocacy work with you and seek collaborations and partnerships. And if we can do this in 1 minute, Carol, let me describe to our friends on the other side what we do in research. We really think about ourselves in two ways. One is we facilitate the work of others, and we do this through a variety of programming, whether it is the seed grants we give to investigators, whether it is our biobanking and research advisory activities, patient registries, etc., or our travel award programs that we give to young investigators to come and attend meetings, as well as our webinar series that bring practitioners and influencers to talk about research. We also, in addition to these research facilitating programs, we do invest in research ourselves in a proactive manner, and we have several partnerships. One is with Cornell University, with Dr. Maureen Hansen on discovery platforms and bioenergetics. We have another program with Sheila Stewart, Dr. Sheila Stewart at WashU for immunosenescence programs. And we have also a partnership with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center for drug discovery targets. So here you go. I summarized the work of 5 years in 1 second, 1 minute. So maybe we'll hear about advocacy.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was just an extraordinary summary. And similarly, on the advocacy front, we are engaged in many activities with an emphasis on collaboration. You know, as we all know in the MECFS community, there are often disagreements within the advocacy community, but we know that so long as we focus at the highest level on the core issue, which is we all care deeply about this disease from personal experience and from watching the suffering of others, and we know how important it is that we move the governments both in the US and in other nations, and that we help the public understand the seriousness of this disease, that so long as we keep our eye on that kind of focus, we will make progress with advocacy. We have recently begun to advocate directly with Congress here in the US, and we also have taken care to really develop meaningful, respectful relationships based on our research focus with the folks at CDC and the NIH and the other agencies that really can have the most significant impact on this disease. So that's my 1 minute summary of the advocacy work we do.
Yeah, thank you. So whenever you are here in LA, come visit us. We'll take you to lunch and we'll talk about collaborations, and please enjoy your meeting or assembly and stay connected with us. We really want your partnerships and collaborating with you.
Well, thank you so much. It really is a pleasure to have this moment to speak with you, even at a distance. Again, Carol Head and Dr. Zahir Nali from the SOLVE MECFS initiative, and we say good day.
Bye-bye.
So I'm going to do what I've been told not to do and take another minute, because, you know, Alan and I have this relationship. He tells me something and then I just stretch it just a little bit. So just to finish off, what are we actually going to do about that? Well, we're still working on it at the moment. What we want to do is to employ somebody to be based in Geneva, that powerhouse of decision-making with the United Nations and the World Health Organization, to actually build the networks, to raise the profile, and to get people to listen so that we can get to the point of having a discussion, a debate, and potentially a resolution to be made to create that mandate for action. We've got the opportunity working with a big global organisation based, it's actually based in Geneva, working in the cancer field, who said, you know what, we've got all the expertise, we know how you can do this, we'll give you an office space, we'll tutor and support your member of staff, we'll help you navigate the pay systems in Geneva and social charges and that kind of thing. We can help you make this happen. So that's real collaboration in action for me. And so we had a legacy this last year, and Philip, our treasurer, will talk a bit more about that this afternoon. That would help us fund this post for 1 year. It's really expensive in Geneva. The salaries are way much higher than we're paid here. but we've got funding potentially to do that for 1 year. We need at least 2 years to make this, to kickstart this. So the next stage for us is to try and work out how we can get that second year funding. We know it's going to go beyond 2 years, but 2 years would give us a starting point. We've got this opportunity now and we really need to seize it. So I'm really excited about this. We've got a way to go yet, and I hope this time next year I can stand here and say we've actually kick-started this and we're making this happen. Thank you.
I told you it was boxing above our weight. It's a very exciting initiative. So it's just gone 1 o'clock, so it is now time for lunch, and we will regather at 2 o'clock back here, please. Thank you.